The loading ramp told the story before anyone said a word. Dents along both sides where 1,400 pounds had slammed against the rails. Skid marks on the rubber mat where hooves had locked and refused. A bent hinge on the trailer gate where the bull had hit it hard enough to twist 16-gauge steel, and boot prints everywhere. 6 different sole patterns from 6 different men who'd spent the morning trying to put a bull on a trailer and failing in 6 different ways. It was 11:45 on a Saturday in August. The temperature on the western slope of Colorado was 96 degrees, which is hot for anywhere, and especially hot for Montrose County, where the mesa country rolls out flat and wide, and the sun sits on top of you like it's being paid by the hour. Colton Briggs stood at the loading chute with his hat pushed back and sweat running down his neck, and the specific expression of a man who'd been beaten by an animal and was trying not to look like it. Colton was 42. He ran a 700-cow commercial operation on BLM allotment and deeded ground between Montrose and Ridgway at the base of the Uncompahgre Plateau. Good operation, good cattle, good crew, and one bull that had just made every one of them look like they'd never loaded livestock before. The bull was a 7-year-old Angus called Anvil, not because of his color. He was black, like every Angus, so the name was redundant. But because when he was a calf, he'd gotten into the burn pile behind the calving barn and come out covered in ash, and the name stuck the way ranch names do, without logic and forever. Anvil was the best bull in the Kirkwood program. His calves weaned heavier, graded higher, and sold for $60 to $80 more per head than any other sire group on the ranch. Genetically, he was a $40,000 animal doing the work of 4 average bulls, and he would not load on a trailer. It wasn't new. Anvil had been difficult to load since he was 3, but difficult and impossible are different categories, and over the past 2 years, Anvil had migrated from the first to the second. Colton needed him moved to summer pasture on the BLM allotment 40 miles north. The only way to get there was by trailer, and the bull had decided that trailers were something that happened to other cattle. The morning had gone like this. First attempt. 2 men with sorting sticks, standard approach, funneled the bull through the alley into the trailer. Anvil entered the alley, reached the ramp, smelled the trailer floor, and reversed. A 1,400-pound Angus going backward through an alley is not something you stop with a sorting stick. Both men went over the panels. Second attempt. 4 men, tighter configuration, panels narrowing the path. Anvil went halfway up the ramp and hit the left rail hard enough to bend it, then backed down, turned in the alley, and stood there looking at the crew with an expression that Colton described as polite refusal. Third attempt. Colton himself in the alley with a hot shot, which he hated using but was running out of options. Anvil took the shock on his hip, flinched, and instead of moving forward, turned and faced Colton with his head low. Not charging, just communicating. The message was clear. You can do that again if you want, but I'm not getting on that trailer. Colton put the hotshot down, called the crew off, stood at the loading ramp looking at the dents and the skid marks and the bent hinge, and knew he was out of ideas. His ranch manager, a woman named June Weiler, was the one who suggested calling Earl. Colton looked at her. Earl Hobbs? You got a better idea? Earl Hobbs was 81 years old. He lived alone on a 40-acre remnant of what had once been a 400-acre ranch outside of Olathe, 15 miles north of Montrose. He'd sold the cattle 10 years ago when his knees gave out. Sold the equipment. Kept the house, the barn, and the 40 acres, because selling those would have meant selling the place where his wife Ruth was buried under the cottonwood tree in the south pasture. Earl had been handling cattle on the western slope since 1961, 60 years. He'd worked ranches from Telluride to Grand Junction, loaded more bulls than he could count, and had a reputation that existed in the specific way reputations exist in rural Colorado. Not on paper, not online, but in the things that old ranchers said to young ranchers when the young ranchers had tried everything and were ready to listen. He'll load anything, June said. My father used him in the 90s. Said Earl loaded a bull that 3 crews couldn't touch. Took him 2 hours, no hotshot, no panels, just him and the bull and the trailer. Colton called Earl at noon, explained the situation. Earl's voice on the phone was dry and unhurried, the voice of a man who'd been conserving energy for 81 years and saw no reason to spend it on a phone call. I'll come by around 3. It's 96 degrees out here, Earl. You sure you don't want to wait until morning? 3 is when I want to come. He hung up. Earl pulled into the Kirkwood Ranch at 3:05 in a truck that was older than half the crew. He got out slowly, the way men move when their knees have filed a formal complaint with management, and walked to the loading area where Colton and 5 hands were standing around the trailer looking at their boots. Earl was thin, not frail thin, weathered thin. The kind of lean that comes from decades of physical work and the metabolic efficiency of a body that had learned to run on coffee and stubbornness. His hands were enormous for his frame, the hands of a man who'd spent 63 years gripping rope and wire and animal and had developed knuckles that looked like they'd been carved from mesquite root. He looked at the trailer, looked at the dents, looked at the ramp, looked at Anvil, who was standing in the holding pen 50 feet away, watching the humans with the calm patience of an animal that had already won 3 rounds and was waiting to see if there'd be a 4th. Earl looked at the sun. That was the thing the crew noticed. He didn't look at the bull. He looked at the sun, checked its position, checked the shadows. Then he walked the holding pen perimeter, noting where shade fell and where it didn't. At 3 in the afternoon in August on the western slope, shade was on the east side. The trailer was parked on the north side. The sun was hammering the west and south sides of the pen. The bull was standing in the only strip of shade, a 6-foot band along the east fence cast by the barn. Earl walked back to Colton. Move the trailer. Colton blinked. To where? East side. Back it up to the pen gate on the east fence, where the shade is. Why? Because your bull isn't afraid of the trailer. He's not afraid of the ramp. He's not afraid of you or your crew or your hotshot. He doesn't like being pressured into a dark box by people who are in a hurry. And every time you push him, you confirm that the trailer means stress. So he resists harder every time. Earl looked at the sun again. But it's 96 degrees. And that bull has been standing in the shade all day because he's smart enough to know that sun at 96 degrees is miserable. If the only shade in this pen is inside that trailer, he'll load himself. You just have to give him a reason that's his idea instead of yours. Colton stared at Earl, then at the trailer, then at the sun. You want to use the heat to load him. I want to stop fighting him and let the weather do the work. You've been treating this like a battle between your crew and that bull. It's not. It's a conversation. And right now, the only thing that bull is listening to is the temperature. Colton had his crew move the trailer. Took 20 minutes to reposition it on the east side of the pen, backed up to the gate, ramp down. The trailer's shadow now fell inside the pen, a rectangle of shade roughly 8 by 20 feet, extending from the ramp into the holding area. Then Earl gave the instruction that made the crew look at each other. Take down the east fence panels, all of them. Open the pen so there's nothing between the bull and the trailer except space. Then remove the alley panels. Remove the sorting sticks. Remove yourselves. Go sit in the barn. I want nothing in this pen except that bull, that trailer, and the sun. You want us to leave? Colton asked. Every one of you is a stimulus. Every person standing at that fence is a reason for that bull to stay alert. He can't relax if he's being watched. And he can't make a decision if he's being pressured. Take the pressure out. All of it. The crew dismantled the alley configuration, removed the sorting panels, pulled back to the barn 100 feet away. Colton went with them, reluctantly. Earl stayed. He walked to the opposite side of the pen, the west side, the sun side, and sat down on a bucket. In the full heat, 96 degrees on his back. No shade, no water. He sat there. Anvil was in his strip of shade on the east side, near the barn wall. But the crew had removed the panels that defined the east fence. The barn shadow that he'd been standing in was still there, but it was thinner now. The angle of the afternoon sun was pushing it narrower every minute. And directly ahead of him, the trailer's shadow was wide and dark and cool. 3:15. Anvil stood in his shade. Earl sat in his sun. 3:25. The barn shadow had narrowed by 2 feet. Anvil shifted to stay in the remaining shade. His options were shrinking with the angle of the sun. 3:35. The barn shadow was almost gone. Anvil was standing in a strip of shade barely wider than his body. Ahead of him, the trailer, open ramp, dark interior, shade that wasn't moving because it was structural, not solar. Earl hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't made a sound. He was just a man on a bucket in the sun, occupying the bright side of the pen so the only human presence was in the least comfortable direction. 3:40. Anvil walked, not toward the trailer, toward the shade. The trailer happened to be where the shade was, but that wasn't the bull's calculation. His calculation was simpler. It's hot. That's cool. I'm going there. He walked to the ramp, sniffed it. The rubber mat was warm, but the interior of the trailer was 10 degrees cooler than the pen. His nose told him that. 1,100 olfactory receptors processing air temperature the way a thermometer processes mercury. He put one front hoof on the ramp, then the other. Walked up, walked in, stood in the trailer in the shade, in the cool, in the dark. Earl stood up from the bucket, walked to the trailer, closed the gate, latched it. 35 minutes. No hot shot. No sorting stick. No alley. No panels, no crew, no pressure. Just the sun doing what 63 years of experience had taught Earl it would do, being more persuasive than any man with a stick. Colton and the crew walked out of the barn. The bull was on the trailer. The ramp was up. The gate was latched. Nobody had touched the animal. Nobody had entered the pen while the bull was moving. Nobody had raised their voice or their hand or their heart rate. Colton stood at the trailer and looked at Earl. I spent 4 hours and 6 men trying to load that bull. Earl was putting his bucket in his truck. You spent 4 hours and 6 men trying to win an argument. I didn't argue. I just made sure the only comfortable place in the pen was the place you needed him to be. June Weiler was leaning on the barn door. She'd watched the whole thing from inside. The old man sat in the sun for 35 minutes, and the bull loaded himself. He didn't load himself, Earl corrected. He chose shade. The trailer was just where the shade happened to be. You don't load cattle. You arrange the world so that getting on the trailer is the best decision the animal can make. Then you let them make it. Colton looked at the sun, then at the trailer, then at Earl, who was easing himself into his truck with the careful movements of a man whose knees had been negotiating with gravity for 81 years. Can I call you next time? Earl started his engine. You don't need to call me. You need to look at the sun before you set up your trailer. Every stockman in this county parks their trailer wherever it's convenient for the truck. Nobody asks where it's convenient for the bull. He pulled out of the driveway, drove north toward Olathe, toward the 40 acres and the cottonwood tree, and the silence of a house that used to have 2 voices. Colton's crew loaded Anvil 3 more times that year. Each time, they parked the trailer on the shade side. Each time, they removed the panels and the people and the pressure. Each time, the bull walked on within an hour. No hot shot, no sorting stick, no 6-man crew. Just the sun, the shade, and the understanding that a bull who won't load isn't a bull who's being difficult. He's a bull who's been given nothing but bad reasons to cooperate. Give him a good one, and he'll walk on every time. Earl Hobbs died that December. Heart stopped in his sleep on a Tuesday night. His neighbor found him Thursday when the mail stacked up. He was 81. He'd been handling cattle for 63 years and teaching people how to handle cattle for the last 20 of those. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody published his methods. Nobody named a technique after him. The things Earl knew existed in the conversations he had in parking lots and at pen fences and in phone calls that lasted 90 seconds because Earl didn't believe in long phone calls. But Colton Briggs changed how his crew loaded cattle. And June told the story to every rancher she worked with after that. And those ranchers told others. And somewhere in the Montrose County Cattlemen's Association, when the subject of loading difficult bulls comes up, someone always says the same thing. Park the trailer in the shade. Take everything else away. And let the bull decide. That's Earl. That'll always be Earl. A man on a bucket in the sun, waiting for an animal to figure out what he already knew.